another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. It is a big week upcoming and some big guests on. Rocco Miller from the Bracketeer, one of the premier bracketologists out there in college basketball, will be joining. Andy Patton from the Locked On Zags podcast will also be on, and we're going to review the big game of the week coming up on Saturday, Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Again, big matchup for first place. St. Mary's has had a few of these over the last few weeks. Games for first place against Santa Clara, against USF, now against Gonzaga. So big week, and we'll get into all that with Andy a bit later. Some housekeeping: be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and then also on your favorite streaming services, and then follow along on social media at Posts by Zach, and also the Twitter account for the podcast itself, Unoff WCC Pod. All right, so again, lots to get to. We'll be talking a little bit more bracketology. We'll talk some St. Mary's Gonzaga, as that game is now on the horizon. But we're going to take a quick look at what we saw this weekend, this past week, because there's some things we have to look at. And first thing first, let's talk about USF and Gonzaga. The Zags did end up pulling this game out 77-72. And the first half of this game looked very much like the first half Gonzaga played against Santa Clara just a few weeks ago. USF out-rebounded Gonzaga by 8. USF had 9 turnovers in the first half, but held a lead at the break. Jonathan Mobo was not a huge factor in that first half, which, again, if you're looking at that, it's like, that was a good sign. Isaiah Hawthorne had 10 points off the bench. Great to see that from him. But in the second half, the Zags turned it up, and they played much better in that second half, as has been the case over the last month or so. Their second halves have been very strong. Graham Ike had 19 of his 22 points there in the second half. The defense also showed out, I thought, a lot better in that second half. There was a stretch there where they held USF to only one field goal in 12 minutes, nearly 12 minutes in the second half. And USF was down 10 with about 1:14 left, and I, along with the broadcast team, thought that this was over, and we were going to kind of slow walk this to the end, but that was not the case. USF executed the late game hack-a-zag plan to perfection. They really extended that game out. They got within 3 a couple of different times. And then I think the turning point in that was down 4. There was a fumbled handoff between Marcus Williams and Malik Thomas, which resulted in a backcourt violation. And that just absolutely killed the momentum. They had a shot to really kind of get back into that one, and really start to put heavy pressure on the Zags, and just could not do it. But the Zags also were not all that sharp at the end of that game either, missing a good number of critical free throws. We saw Ryan Nembhard miss a couple of them at the end. Anton Watson missed a few, but it was Graham Ike and Ben Gregg who really came through with some clutch free throws at the end. Overall, looking at this one, Gonzaga still looks like they're trying to find that full rhythm. They still haven't played all that great in first halves over the last month. USF, this felt like it was their shot. I don't think they did not get a great game out of Malik Thomas. He shot poorly from the field. Jonathan Mobo was not all that present. He seemed less aggressive than we have come to see him normally, especially over the last couple games against St. Mary's and Gonzaga. So again, not a great way to kind of go into that one, especially when that was one that was kind of a momentum turning game, I felt, for the league as a whole. And now with Gonzaga getting that game, moving on to this week, we are sitting right now. It's St. Mary's, Gonzaga, and Santa Clara now all sit at 1, 2, and 3. USF 2 games back of St. Mary's for first, 1 game back of both Gonzaga and St. Mary's for that second, third slot. Gonzaga and Santa Clara tied at 6 and 1, and of course, as of right now, Santa Clara has the tiebreaker in that scenario. So the Zags are starting to roll a little bit. They've won 4 straight. They're 15-5, 6-1 in the WCC. They did then beat Pacific on Saturday, which also was rocky at the start. Pacific had the lead at half, and I know Pacific has given the Zags some trouble over the last few years, so it wasn't completely surprising they went into Stockton and struggled early. But Graham Ike again, he hit 18 more points in that second half against the Tigers, and he has started to really, really be the go-to guy for the Zags here in the last few weeks, coming through clutch in the second half, free throws, buckets. He's been there. He's been the guy. The guy I think that many expected to see early on, and he was coming off an injury year. It took him some time to kind of get back into the flow of it, figure out where his place in the offense was. And we're starting to see more and more of that as we get deeper into this season. Graham Ike has been great the last few weeks. For USF, now they have to kind of pick themselves up off the mat. They did get a win on Saturday, so they have gotten back into the flow a little bit. This week should be a little bit more of a get right week for them. They are going to be at home for both San Diego and Pacific. This should be a way for them to kind of get back into a flow, get back into a rhythm, because they now have no margin for error on the WCC front. Right now, again, sitting in fourth, just a game back of both Santa Clara and Gonzaga. They still haven't seen Santa Clara yet. They still see Gonzaga one more time, still see St. Mary's one more time. So plenty of opportunities for the Dons to climb back in, but now it's the opportunity for them to start to find their rhythm a little bit again, but then also get ready for those games because they're coming, and they're coming soon. For St. Mary's, looking at this other game, so St. Mary's and LMU played each other on Saturday, and this was one I circled because the Lions had given them fits just a few weeks ago down in LA, and it was no different in this one. St. Mary's did end up pulling it out 70-65, but LMU shot 51% from the field. This is only the second time all year long that the St. Mary's defense has allowed a team to shoot more than 50%. They got 24 points off the bench from Justin Wright. They were +5 in rebounding, which is only the third time St. Mary's has been out-rebounded all year long. Kelly Laupepe, Will Johnston had 15 apiece. A lot of things went well for LMU. A lot of things went right. But one of the things that got them into trouble was the fouls. They sent St. Mary's to the line a lot, and St. Mary's was very good about playing solid defense without fouling, without really putting themselves at risk. St. Mary's was 18 for 20 from the free throw line, 90% from the line. They had also the turnovers. So it's not that LMU was sloppy with the ball necessarily. I think they were right about where their season average is. It was that St. Mary's took incredibly great care of the ball. Only 4 turnovers for the night. St. Mary's had a 14-6 lead, points off turnovers. They also got 25 points from Augustus Marshallonis. Aiden Mahaney did not have that great of a game, 9 points for the night. Marshallonis stepped up in a big, big way, also 7 assists. And he's been that number two. He's been really their best player for a while now. And Mahaney has been allowed to kind of like be the scoring punch and not have to be that main guy all the time. And we just saw another example of that on Saturday with Marshallonis really stepping in and taking the load off of him. And then also Joshua Jefferson also had a great game. Like, we're starting to see those two really be more and more the focal points and where the success lies for the St. Mary's team. Jefferson had 15 points, 6 for 10 from the field, 4 rebounds. So again, another solid performance from him. And in a game in which St. Mary's did not play its best, did not rebound nearly as well as we're used to seeing them play, which is going to be critical this week. This is going to be a tough week for St. Mary's, as it is going to be for Gonzaga. I think both of these squads, it's like, because it's going to be Gonzaga LMU on Tuesday night, and before they see St. Mary's on Saturday, and St. Mary's is going to see Santa Clara in Moraga on Wednesday. So 2 very tough games, I feel, for both Gonzaga and St. Mary's before they see each other this weekend. And of course, we're gonna focus, because it's only once a week for the podcast, so I'm gonna focus on the bigger game. But and I'll talk in more detail about those 2 games, because you cannot overlook either of those contests. LMU won the last time they went up to Spokane. Santa Clara has played St. Mary's tough, and I don't want to put too much emphasis on what we saw a couple weeks ago, because that just felt like that was Santa Clara coming off of a really highly emotional game, and just were not able to come through in that one and have the emotional punch that they needed against St. Mary's to stay in that ball game. Maybe that would have happened anyway, but I want to see this kind of clean slate. Let's see what Santa Clara can do, and I'm sure they're going to be hungry and really motivated to play well on Wednesday to see if they can rebound after that tough loss just a couple weeks ago. Okay, before we get any further, let's get to both interviews. We're going to get to Rocco Miller. We're going to talk about where both St. Mary's and Gonzaga kind of sit as far as the bracket, where he has them, what work is left to do, and what we might see from some of these teams moving forward, and maybe some unsung heroes from the conference to this point. All right. I'm really happy to have Rocco Miller on from the Bracketeer, one of the premier bracketologists out there in college basketball. Rocco, thanks for hopping on. It's great to have you back. How's the last couple of weeks? I know you've been seeing obviously a lot of hoops, and got to see you last week at USF. So how's it been going for you the last few weeks?
Zach, my neighbor, good to be back on with you. Thanks for having me again. It's been good. It's been good. I've been on the road most of the season, but this last week I hit the reset button, had a lot of different bracket forecasting to zero in on. And the interesting thing about forecasting is I think January is harder than any other time of year, because at this stage you have more non-conference results than you do conference results still, probably about a 2-1 margin. And it's just, it takes a lot more work, because you might have 60 or so teams on the bubble, and I might only have 7 or 8 spots for them. And to truly have a full evaluation, the path to clarity is just so much longer and exasperating. So like last Sunday night and last Thursday night, going into those forecasts, a process that would typically be done in about 6 hours takes me about 8 or 9 hours. So, being home was good for that. And yeah, we saw each other at the San Francisco St. Mary's game, an impressive St. Mary's kind of classic traditional Randy Bennett beat down of the Dons. You give St. Mary's any time, like a week to prepare for a big game. Almost every time I would, not that I'm a betting man, but I would put my money on Randy in those situations. And they were so prepared. They took Jonathan Mogbo out of the game, a potential player of the year candidate. And outside of that, since then, this last week, I've had a chance to watch teams in almost every league, certainly all the power leagues. I've had a lot of shuffling, a lot of surprises. Out in the Mountain West, we are waking up this morning with Utah State in first place. Out in the Atlantic 10, we're waking up this morning with Richmond in first place. Out in the American Conference, we're waking up this morning with Charlotte in first place. And in the Big 12, we have Texas Tech in first. There's just surprises all over the conference races, which makes this process really, really fun.
Yeah, it's always fun, especially these past few college basketball Saturdays are just end to end. It's just the marathon watches are always fun to kind of wake up and actually have those Big East games, and then cap it off with some WCC or Mountain West action at the end. And yeah, and it really does feel like the Mountain West, like, because there's been so much crossover with the WCC and the Mountain West, as far as they've played a ton against each other in this past non-conference. So very, very much keeping an eye on how all those teams are doing as it's going to relate to the WCC teams and what their outlook is going to be. So let's start with St. Mary's, because that's where we last saw each other. I mean, this St. Mary's team just looks like they're rocking and rolling right now. They're coming off, I believe it's now 8 straight wins. They've won, I think it's 12 of the last 13. And now they did They had LMU on Saturday. LMU did put up a really good fight against them. LMU's given them problems both times they've matched up. But you have them as an 8 seed right now, going into the tournament. What are you seeing from this team that you like? And then obviously the metrics are really loving what the Gaels are doing right now as well.
Right. Yeah. So just in general, basketball wise, as you said, 8-game winning streak, 4 of those coming on the road. I think the really crucial thing for the WCC race is they've already got 3 of the tougher road games out of the way with the win at Santa Clara, the win at San Francisco, and the win at LMU. Of course, now they'll have the big one we'll talk about in a little bit at Gonzaga this Saturday. But a lot of the what's left outside of the 2 Gonzaga games are extremely manageable matchups. Matchups will be heavily favored to succeed. And I think as it sits today, the snapshot in time, you look at St. Mary's compared to a lot of the quote unquote bubble today, or even like that middle section of the bracket, whether it's a 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 seed. St. Mary's, I think, is winning a lot of those comparisons due to the fact that they have a road win at Colorado State. Now, Colorado State's struggling a little bit now, so we'll see if that continues to carry as much water as it did last week. Of course, just a heartbreaking loss for the Rams yesterday against Wyoming. But as it stands right now, Colorado State's still 34th in the net, which is the top half of Quad 1. And in evaluations, we call that a 1A win or an elite win. So St. Mary's has that. A lot of teams in this area don't have that. And then you supplement that with the win over New Mexico, which is only getting better with age. New Mexico all the way up to number 20 in the net right now. The win at San Francisco is in that same Quad 1B category as San Francisco checks in at number 60 today. And then outside of that, they did lose to Utah and Boise, but that overall record in those top 7 results is 3-4, but all 3 are in Quad 1. So they don't want to take any more losses there, but you can kind of start to back it up in the bottom of Quad 2. You get Santa Clara falls there, UNLV falls there. And then, once you decide, hey, we're putting St. Mary's in the field, and today that's really not a decision because they're the first place WCC team.
Right.
Then you're having a seeding discussion. And I think St. Mary's, as you saw the last couple of years, getting the 5 seed in the actual bracket, they win a lot of these seeding battles because, as you said, they're coming in at 19th in the BPI, which I'm not a huge fan of the BPI, but it shows up on the team sheet, so it's important. And then they're 30th in the Ken Pom last I checked. So with those 2 metrics in place, they're going to win a lot of the comparisons against those teams next to them. And they've got road wins, whereas I see so many of these like Big 12 teams or Big 10 teams in this area that still haven't even really won a road game yet. So for me, I'm going to go with the team that's proven that they can win away from home. And St. Mary's has that beautiful 6-3 road neutral record.
Yeah, St. Mary's, especially with the win at LMU, at Santa Clara, at USF, really kind of solidifies that. How much is that those 2? And because I do hear people still bringing up the Weber State loss and then also the Missouri State loss. I know like those are probably like the 2 that are bringing up any hesitation about this team. But in your evaluation of them, how much weight are those 2 games playing?
Well, it's one of those things. You certainly never want that. Right now, they're both in Quad 3, so I guess that's a little bit easier to stomach. There's always a chance that either could fall into Quad 4 at this point. Missouri State's had some weird games lately, but they won a couple times this week. Weber State just lost at home to Idaho State last night. So I'm confused on the direction of that team. They have an all-star in Dylan Jones, but really played inconsistent the last couple of weeks. And if you take more Big Sky losses, they could end up with a Quad 4. So that wouldn't be good for St. Mary's. However, I think the overall answer to your question is it's always a balancing act. So how much good did you bring to the table and how much bad did you bring to the table? If the good outweighs the bad, or if all things are equal and you're still really impressed with the wins, typically the committee will still go with the positive end of that evaluation. Now, if they take a loss to a Pepperdine or a San Diego or somebody like that in the league, then we might see a situation where the bad starts to outweigh the good. And I do think if you get to the end of the year and you get swept by Gonzaga or lose to them 3 times, it could also be a situation where it starts to unbalance. So although St. Mary's has a much better seeding placement today, a lot of that's just due to the performance. So don't treat it as if they're fully in and there's no worries. There's still a lot of work to do.
Right. Still more than a month to go for the regular season, then also in the conference tournament. So I'm definitely trying to be as optimistic as possible, being a St. Mary's grad, but it's like definitely like know that there's still obviously work to do. And you mentioned Gonzaga, and Gonzaga is a team that does doesn't have a Q1 win, but doesn't have any of those bad losses. They don't have a loss like the Weber State or the Missouri State on their resume. Like their resume is pretty clean. Like they've beaten the teams they're supposed to beat. They just don't have that marquee game, which to an extent has really hurt kind of those metrics. Also, the fact that even some of those games, UCLA, USC, Syracuse,
Yeah,
have not aged well at
right.
all this year. When you evaluate Gonzaga, because clearly they have work to do if they're going to climb back into an at-large conversation. What in your mind is going to get them back on the right side of the bubble?
Well, I think they're going to have to beat a few teams that are either in the field or closer to the field. Obviously, San Francisco's a really good start there. Syracuse, interestingly enough, like last Monday, Syracuse was in my first four to Dayton as a projected in team, and then the next day, they get clobbered at home by Florida State, and they dropped from. I mean, their net was never that strong. I think their net was low 60s, but it crashed all the way back down to 76, and it really made it out of whack for Syracuse themselves to be a tournament team. So one of the things the committee looks at very closely, especially when we get to the end, is you start to snap the chalk on a lot of these bubble teams and say, are they a tournament team? And very simply, yes or no. So in that case, Syracuse last week, if they were a tournament team like I had them, then at least Gonzaga could say, hey, we have a win over a tournament team. It's better than having none. But unfortunately, today they have none against a team that would be above the cut line for the at large, and so they just got to keep winning, like you said. And that's not going to be a bad place to be because in the SEC, the Big 12, the Big 10, certainly those three leagues, you're going to see about 12 more games per team played. Each team plays on average 2 games a week. And every single one of those games, a lot of those teams match up against each other. Somebody has to lose. So the math of it is actually not bad for a team that's just kind of sitting around waiting and winning. And obviously, Gonzaga, once they're in a strong position for seeding as well, being that they're both 22nd in KenPom and 22nd in BPI. They're 31 in net. So anywhere in that range would say, hey, you should be top half of the bracket. Gonzaga, if they don't get another marquee win, won't be. But there's the opportunity there to really ascend up if they get the win at Kentucky or if they sweep St. Mary's. Some of those things could really change their fate. Otherwise, if they split St. Mary's, they lose at Kentucky, and they're kind of still in this spot come March. As long as they don't take the bad losses, I still think they're a quote unquote selectable team. Maybe stick them in the first four in Dayton, which would be pretty weird for everybody, but better than not making it, right?
Right. I mean, this is a team that has not missed the NCAA tournament under Mark Few, so it does feel like they're just in such a strange place right now.
Yeah.
It's not like that they haven't been on this bubble territory before. Like we can go back to 2016 or like 2011. Like there have been these years in this run where they've kind of been on that cut line and have needed some help down the stretch. They have, it looks like they're probably going to have 5 Q1 opportunities left on the schedule. One of them is probably actually the WCC final. So that's one of like, well, if you win that, then you don't have to worry about it anyway. But looking at it, you have the 2 games against St. Mary's, at Kentucky, at USF. Is there a number of like how many of these they have to pull off? Because it feels, I mean, if they beat Kentucky on the road at Rupp, like that is going to carry much more weight than anything else they're going to get in the WCC. But short of that, like what do you think they're going to have to do? Like outside clean house, and then how many of these do they have to have?
Right. I think winning at Kentucky is like so much harder than winning at St. Mary's. I think in reality it is. However, on the team sheet and to the average athletic director on the committee, it might look almost as good because the net is so strong for St. Mary's and the net is all about your opponents. So Kentucky, I'm not looking at it right now, but they're probably somewhere around 15, just give or take, in the net. And St. Mary's is 21. So, if you split those results, or even if they won both, it's gonna look like 2 extremely strong road wins, 2 of the best road wins money can buy if you can beat two top 25 net teams on the road. And I think that'll probably still be the case. So even if they split them, that's good as well. I think something to keep in mind is right now is they're 0-4 in quad one. So the problem with losing, even though I don't think losing both changes their picture dramatically, they go from 0-4 to 0-6. And that just allows a lot more scrutiny when you had 6 cracks at it and you couldn't beat any of those teams. I think that starts to paint a different picture than we're seeing right now. We're kind of seeing it still as, all right, it's still Gonzaga. They still have these games coming up. They'll find a way to win one or two of them, and then we'll figure out the rest from there. There's no guarantee of that. So if they lose both of those big opportunities, they'll certainly be 0-6 in their 6 biggest games. And that alone could be enough reason to feel okay about leaving them out of the field.
Well, this Gonzaga team, even in conference play, as we've seen, has struggled in first half of games. So we'll kind of dive in a little bit more into what we've seen on the court, and because we've seen them struggle against Pepperdine in the first half, struggle against Pacific in the first half. Yeah. Obviously, we know they struggled against Santa Clara and USF in the first half of each of the times they played these teams. But we've also seen pretty large swings the other direction of how well they have played in the second halves of these games. What are you, when you're looking at Gonzaga, when you've gotten to see this team, what's something that like is standing out to you of like what's kind of like keeping them back from being like probably reaching their potential? And this team's not as good as last year's Gonzaga team, but there's still a lot of talent on this squad, and it just doesn't seem like that they're clicking on all at the same time all that often.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. They've certainly struggled to shoot the ball on any sort of consistent level. I think I was probably at least maybe one of these recent games they did better. I know they put up 105 on San Diego, so maybe that was a good day. But up until conference play started, I think their best shooting game was against USC, and I saw them shoot the lights out in that game. And I thought, okay, Gonzaga's back. We thought USC was going to be much better. They're currently in last place in the Pac-12. So I guess, it's always funny to look back on nights like that where you think you're at a big game and maybe it wasn't that big. But from Gonzaga's standpoint, to see them ranked 206th in three-point shooting is just jaw-dropping. They've seemingly have good shooters, but just haven't been able to generate enough offense. I think, the thin bench for this long of the year really starts to play a factor, not only in the preparation, but also the minute distribution and how you attack that first half. And perhaps just a theory here, that's keeping some of the teams like the Pacifics and the other examples you provided around a little bit longer in the game, because, between 7 players, they're going to pretty much eat up all the minutes. And when do you want to use those substitutions? How do you want to match up? There's just limited options at Mark Few's discretion. Having Steele Venters out for the year and a couple other guys banged up, and then not bringing people like Hunter Salas back, there's just been a roster evaporation, if you will, to the point where, yes, the guys on the floor are still extremely talented and it's a good team, but the margins for error are so much thinner than ever before. And I think that's why you're seeing Gonzaga in this situation.
Now we have the matchup this weekend. Gonzaga is going to be hosting St. Mary's. We know this is always the biggest matchup in the WCC.
Yeah.
This one does feel like it's more important for the Zags at this moment than it is for St. Mary's. But for both of these teams, it does feel like this is a potential swing game in the conference, because if St. Mary's pulls this one out, they'll have a 2-game lead on the Zags for the conference. If Gonzaga is able to pull it off, not only do they get their Q1 win, they are then equal again with St. Mary's atop the WCC. As you're kind of like starting to think about this and looking forward to this game, what are some things that you think that are going to be critical for both teams to kind of be able to pull this off?
Well, first of all, I think it was interesting what the league did this week. They stuck both teams with a challenging game in between, but they gave Gonzaga the Tuesday game, which is against LMU, who just had a late night war against St. Mary's where they battled them pretty much to the end. Just kind of a nicer setup for Gonzaga, because now LMU's got to pack up, get up to Spokane. It's already Sunday as we record this. They'll play Tuesday night. whereas St. Mary's is sitting around an extra day, and they'll host Santa Clara Wednesday. But Santa Clara didn't even play yesterday, so in that matchup, Santa Clara's actually got the deeper prep. So I think they're going to get Santa Clara's best punch on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And then you go and assuming they'll get up to Spokane, by Friday morning or Thursday night. So I think just from a prep standpoint and the way the league set it up, Gonzaga's got some built-in advantages here. They'll have that extra day of rest, no travel. And in general, when the game's been played in Spokane, Gonzaga's had they found ways there's been some really good games, but Gonzaga's always kind of found a way to pull it out. Now, regardless of all that, I'm a huge person when it comes to logistics that way.
Mm-hmm.
You see it play out in league play all the time if there's a logistics advantage with travel or prep time. We saw it when we were both at the San Francisco St. Mary's game, giving St. Mary's a whole week to prep for that. Really mattered a lot. So anyway, I always want to start off with that. But I think in the way conference play is played out, St. Mary's, especially in some of their big wins, the analytics are just so much on their side, both offensively and defensively. Best team on both sides of the ball. If they can go out there and play a clean game, we'll talk about our unsung heroes of the league later. But the way Augustus Marciulionis is playing right now, I think he's been around so long. He's probably agnostic to the kennel. So should guys like Mitchell Saxon and a much improved Joshua Jefferson. We'll see how Mahaney does. Mahaney's been all over the map on this sophomore campaign. So I'm curious from St. Mary's standpoint, how they attack the moment, but I do trust some of those initial players I mentioned. And on Gonzaga's side, the atmosphere will be insane. I'm not sure if they're doing the ESPN game day thing or not, but I'm pretty sure it's a big ESPN event. And Gonzaga, almost every single time when the hype's big like that and they're at home, they're going to come through. So I have to, I would give unbelievable credit and kudos if St. Mary's can go in there and win in that entire logistical situation.
Yeah, there are definitely some advantages, and almost especially with Santa Clara with the longer prep time for Wednesday's game. And Herb Sendek's going to have something ready, especially considering how the last go around went. Because I think you were at that game as well as Santa Clara St. Mary's. Were you there for that one?
I just did the Santa Clara win over Gonzaga, but it was like that same week. It was 2 days later, and they were so flat, and St. Mary's was so prepared. It was a disaster across the board.
Yeah, that one was like a perfect storm against Santa Clara on that Saturday because they all the emotion of that win, just the perfect environment, Steve Nash in the building. That was a great moment for Santa Clara to get that win.
It was.
But having to see St. Mary's 2 nights later is a rough go, and there have been a few teams that have actually had to get both teams the same week. I think San Diego had it week 1. They had St. Mary's, Gonzaga, then Santa Clara had to do it. Pacific had to do it this past week. Even USF, even though it wasn't the same week, it was consecutive games, St. Mary's, Gonzaga. So there have been a few teams actually in the league that have gotten the dreaded 1-2 punch of having to see them both in consecutive games.
It's crazy. The league scheduling has been really interesting in this situation. I really... I spent so much time on non-conference. When the league schedule came out, I didn't dissect it enough. But now that we're going through it, it's just, wow. Like, you can almost paint a picture on how this is going to play out with the logistics of it all. But, the teams still have to show up. They still have to make shots. They still have to win. So I don't want to put all the credit to just the schedule. But it's been pretty fascinating to see how this plays out.
Yeah, and we're just about through the first half of conference play as we start to turn the calendar into February. So it's going to be really fun to kind of see how the rest of this plays out. And the schedule is going to, next few weeks, don't have the traditional Thursday, Saturday, so it'll get a little bit nuttier the next couple before it starts to straighten out by mid-February. So as we've kind of hinted, did want to kind of talk about some of maybe this unsung heroes that we've seen in WCC play. And so not the Anton Watsons, not the Graham EKs, not going to talk about the Aiden Mahaneys, but there are a number of guys in this league that have really played well and might be flying a little bit more under the radar. And Rocco, I wanted to ask you who's kind of been some of the guys you've whether you've been able to see them or as you look at some of the stat sheets and everything else, who's kind of jumped out at you as some guys that might be just flying under the radar just a bit?
Yeah, so I have to start with Augustus Marciulionis. This morning on KenPom, he actually cracked the top 5 players in the league list, which I was really impressed by. Of course, he was the hero on Saturday night against LMU. He played all 40 minutes, 7 assists, 25 points. He's stepping up and taking big shots in big moments. This is like a kid I've been thrilled about his ceiling since he got to St. Mary's. And his father, Sharunas, played for the Seattle Sonics when I was growing up. I grew up in Seattle. So the family name, if you're from Seattle in my generation, you have to be a fan because Sharunas was a rock star for both the Sonics and the Warriors in the old days. So it's so cool to see his talent finally start to come to fruition. I think the last 2 seasons and maybe even the start of this season, he's just a little shy, a little timid, chooses to pass before he shoots. And if you ever watch, like, and I know you do, Zach, like the St. Mary's scrimmages or talk to the coaches throughout the offseason, they always told me, like, this kid's lights out in scrimmages and practices. He's our leader. He doesn't make mistakes. He's our best on-ball defender now that Logan Johnson's gone. And all of that is finally coming true in the last couple of weeks. And so he just deserves tons of credit because he stuck with it. He took the coaching. He's a team-first guy. He's everything that the St. Mary's program is. He embodies it all. And then, just a quick shout out also while we're on St. Mary's to Joshua Jefferson. You and I talked a little bit about him, how much he's grown up and how willing he is to take big shots. He was a menace to San Francisco a week ago in that big road win, and he's matured a ton. So those two guys really moving the needle. Don't want to bash Aiden Mahaney. He's an incredible talent as well, but he's just had a couple performances this year that he just can't find his rhythm or his stroke. And you saw last night he missed his first 4 or 5 shots. Randy gave him the quick hook. So he doesn't have the rope that he had at the start of the year. And mainly it's because Randy knows he's got these other options that are a lot more trustworthy, like Marshallonis and Jefferson. So kudos to those guys. At San Francisco, I want to give a ton of credit to Malik Thomas. He's carrying the guards at San Francisco very clearly, even though there's been another emerging guard in freshman Ryan Beasley that's playing well. But Thomas has scored in double figures in 12 straight games, a couple Ken Pom MVPs in that stretch. He was the leading scorer in his high school. He didn't go to the biggest high school. And I think at USC, he really struggled to be around so many great players and find his role, carve out a role. And at San Francisco, he came with a much more learning mentality, sponge-like, if you will. Marcus Williams was the anointed and well-deserved leader to start the year. But you've seen how Malik Thomas has kind of slowly taken over that alpha role, and Gerlofson's going to him more and more, and he's been incredibly efficient. His efficiency numbers are fantastic during this 12-game stretch, and you can see his talent level and skill level are through the roof. So shout out to Malik. Over at San Diego, a guy that kind of jumped off the page, obviously had a great game in yesterday's win against Pepperdine, is Steven Jamerson. He's now had six straight productive games, and he was just an automatic bucket last night. He went 10 for 11, all inside the paint. He's a 6'10", 230 or 240-pound load, and he's really starting to find his rhythm under Steve Lavin. I think when the season started at San Diego, they were so bad last year, and they basically just scrapped all the older players, kept a couple guys like Jamerson. I think it's in his second year there. A lot of freshmen, and at the time and during the press conferences and the media day, I was kind of under the mindset like, okay, this team's going to have a really rough season. But the good thing about what Lavin built was he's got a lot of try-hard players, a lot of guys that want to get better, they want to be there, they want to develop, and there's really no egos at San Diego. So guys like Jamerson are starting to emerge because you have a culture like that. You can start to succeed when kind of everybody else has written you off. And so credit to Steven. And then I think the last one, I'm sure you've talked about him. I've got a few others, but I want to pass it to you at some point. Michael Ajayi, he's just had a monster year for Pepperdine. In fact, his last couple of performances haven't been as great, but just the overall come out of nowhere JUCO guy, success story at Pepperdine. He's certainly going to get a ton of calls to transfer up at the end of the year. He's just been a double-double machine for the Waves.
Yeah, all those guys you've mentioned have been really, like, you started to see something grow with those guys like Michael Jai, making that leap to D1 and really kind of like becoming the guy, especially on a team that was supposed to have Javon Porter early on. He was hurt, wasn't available, and yeah, he kind of stepped right into that role and really started to play well. San Diego's an
Yeah.
and then San Diego, I feel like they have a lot of really interesting pieces. Again, like they're so young, so like there's a lot to kind of pull from. But one of the guys, you mentioned Jamerson, but one of the guys I really looks fascinating is Kevin Patton Jr. He is kind of
Oh
like
yeah.
been like almost a glue guy for what San Diego has been able to do. Like he rebounds, he plays defense well. You see the offense starting to show up a little bit here and there. He's really, to me, kind of one of those guys who's starting to figure it out again. Like that San Diego team is so young, so raw that I think we're just seeing they're going through the growing pains right now. They're getting beat up in conference play. Did pick up a win last night
Yeah.
against
Beat Portland.
Pepperdine.
Yeah, and beat
And
Portland on Tuesday, so they got 2 in a row. And
yeah,
that game was wild because you had PJ Hayes come out of nowhere and hit a school record 9 3-pointers and score 33 points. And then, of course, last night the regression monster hits him and he didn't make any. But they still won the game, so that's an even better sign. I think that the Toreros are finding multiple ways to win.
and I think especially with the win against Pepperdine last night, because they had Pepperdine on the ropes just a week ago, and Pepperdine was able to come back. I think it was like they came back from 15 down in that second half and beat the Toreros. The fact that they were able to come back this week and hold them off and fend them off, I think shows some growth from that squad. That they're figuring it out of how to close out these tough games. So I think
Absolutely.
San Diego's fascinating to watch because, yeah, they're so young. There's talent there. It's just a matter of how long is it going to take to develop it into something that's going to challenge in this league. And I think that's going to be a tough road to climb.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that's helping them close out games is they're 79% from the line in league play, best free throw shooting team by a wide margin, and that of course will only help you win close games if you can get into them. Now, some of these teams you'll probably agree are out of their talent league, so they are going to have a few more punches to the mouth as time goes by. But when they play their Pacifics and Portlands and Pepperdines, they've already played Pepperdine twice, but it'll be interesting to see if they can put a scare into a couple of these top teams.
That's the thing. Like, and I said it before, as league was getting started. Like San Diego had 10 wins before conference play started. So like they had the win against Arizona State. So they had some level of confidence that they could do this. Now I wasn't going to start to slide them past the 5 mark, but they clearly had shown the talent that maybe they could be the one who slides into that 6th spot, and is kind of the leader of that bottom tier of the league.
Yeah, and I can see it. If you go back and look, also the Arizona State win was a splash win for sure, but they also had some really nice wins. With you looking back, I saw Arkansas State play live at Belmont in a really close game. They beat that Arkansas State team by 14 in the MTE they played in down in Palm Desert. And then this Northern Colorado team, to me, has emerged as probably the number 1 contender for Eastern Washington in the Big Sky. Again, we're talking lower level WCC right now, but the fact that they knocked them off, I mean, that's to me like at least 3 pretty impressive in hindsight non-conference wins that they picked up.
Yeah, they're a team that I do feel like obviously like they're already done with Gonzaga, and Gonzaga smacked them twice. They've seen St. Mary's once, and that didn't go well for them either.
No.
But it does seem like that they are a team who could sneak up on the likes of a USF. They could sneak up on a Santa Clara or an LMU. Like they to me feel like the dangerous team if you're one of those teams trying to actually get one of the buys for Vegas.
Right. Yeah, and maybe they play both San Francisco and Santa Clara this week on the road. They didn't match up very well with the Dons the first time, lost by 20 at home. But I do think with Santa Clara coming off that St. Mary's game, they might be able to give the Broncos a good run on Saturday.
Yeah, they're an interesting team. I think it's going to be fascinating to see them grow and see how they can get better throughout the course of the year, because that bottom tier of the league is kind of wide open to see who can sneak into that 6th seed and not have to play in that opening game, or at least like how they're going to restructure because with the 9-team versus the 10-team tournament.
Yeah, I think the format is a. Let me think here. We've got
I think it's 8-9 play each other.
Yeah. Well, you've got the 4-3. We're going to get the single bye.
Yeah.
And then you've got the 1-2 with the double bye. So that means, yeah, you'll have to have an 8-9 game play, and then 5 will get the winner of that, and then 6 will play 7. So if you're in the 8-9, that's the worst spot. You have to play an extra night early.
Yeah. And that'll be, I think that's going to end up being the Thursday because we still have Sunday off this year for the tournament.
That must be a TV problem. But I'm sure they'll get that. I think they'll get that worked out with the Beavers and Cougars joining next year.
That's true. 11-team tournament starting next year for the WCC. At least for a couple of years. See if anyone else can see how long they stick around. And I'm sure it's just going to be for the period in which they figure out what they're going to do with the Pac-2 at the moment, who they're going to probably swoop from probably some of the other conferences. But we'll see how that goes down the road.
And it's a 2-year deal, so you got them for at least 2 years, and we'll shake things out as time goes. But hey, great time to advertise the Beavers and Cougars, both coming off sweeps this weekend. The Beavers just swept the Arizona schools for the first time in 9 years, and it was their first sweep in any Pac-12 series in 4 years against anybody. So great time to be a Beaver. And then the Cougars are firmly on the bubble after beating both the Mountain teams, which was really impressive as well.
Yeah, I mean, adding those two is going to strengthen the league. Like you have a Washington State team who I think when it was announced actually had the best net rating of anyone would have been the best net rated WCC team at that moment.
Yeah,
and then Oregon State I think would have slotted in right around 5 or 6. I think at that time. I need to take a look back to see where they are now, but I'm probably still right about that mark as we're talking right now as well. But yeah, it's going to be exciting when those two join the league, and I think it'll also give it's helpful for both to me. It's going to be helpful for obviously the WCC to get that exposure with two larger schools, but I think also that those two might actually be pleasantly surprised at the competition level that they're going to see in a quote lesser league than what they're used to.
Yeah, and I think logistically, I'm excited that nobody will be on an island anymore because you'll have 2 Eastern Washington teams, 2 Oregon teams, 4 Northern Cal teams, and 3 Southern Cal teams. So you have a lot of different scheduling opportunities with the travel packages to go play them, and it's super close to go Gonzaga to Washington State and also Portland to Oregon State.
Yeah, it does help out at least for a couple of years. And I'm a little disappointed that baseball wasn't coming with them because having Oregon State baseball would have been fun.
Yeah, they're just too elite. They're too big. Yep.
I get that. I saw that. I'm like, that would have been fun. But yeah, that is an elite baseball program
for sure
at Oregon State.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Rocco, for hopping on. This was great to be able to have a chat with you about the bubble, where we are as far as like the tournament goes. Gonzaga St. Mary's this Saturday is going to be fun. Rocco, where are you going to be this weekend?
Ooh, good question. I have not made a final decision. I'm floating around a few ideas, so stay tuned. I will be around town for a few more days at least, and then Thursday I am getting close to possibly going down to Phoenix to see Grand Canyon. I haven't seen them yet this year. They play Seattle U. I haven't been to a game at GCU yet, and that's probably their best competition. So I feel like that's the time to do it. And then Saturdays are always difficult unless it's a late night game like we had last week, just because I am trying to track all 32 leagues throughout the day. I kind of enjoy all the ping pong, not knowing which game to focus on until we get down to like 5 minutes to go. So I might do that again Saturday, but the following week I've already decided I'll be in Utah. So really excited about that. I'll have Nevada at Utah State on that Tuesday, the 6th, Arizona at Utah on Thursday the 8th. So a lot of fun ones coming up and most of them out here in the western part of the country.
Sounds good. Have a great time the next couple of weeks in your travels, and we will definitely catch up down the road.
Sounds great, Zach. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. I want to thank Rocco Miller for popping on and going through what we're going to see the rest of conference play, where Gonzaga sits, where St. Mary's sits. I think it's fascinating to kind of see where each of these teams kind of lines up and what they still need to accomplish. Gonzaga obviously has a little bit more of a hill to climb than it's used to having. Not to say that they're not very capable of doing it. I think we just need to see how these results come through. And Saturday, I think, is going to be another big test for that squad amongst a slew of tests that are coming their way, including the Kentucky game in 2 weeks. Okay, so we've talked a bit more about both of these squads. Let's get more into the matchup itself. And I'll bring in Andy Patton, and he and I will go over what we're seeing, what we're going to look for in this matchup between the Zags and the Gaels. All right, always happy to have on Andy Patton from Locked On Zags podcast and the Locked On College Basketball podcast. You can find him on Twitter at Andy Patton CBB. Andy, how's it going? And I'm sure the week is finally here. I'm starting to get juice for this matchup, St. Mary's and Gonzaga on Saturday.
Yeah, I feel like St. Mary's fans are going to be a little bit more excited about this matchup than Gonzaga fans right now. We're kind of coming off of a week that didn't go the way that we hoped it would in terms of a 2-0 week. Still beat San Francisco at home, still beat Pacific on the road, but not particularly inspiring performances from the team. So I think, especially when you look at the way St. Mary's has been playing lately, it's definitely a little bit more anxious energy in Spokane than it has been in the past, but certainly always excited for this game to be coming up.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, like Gonzaga's had some slow starts over the last few weeks. Slow start against Santa Clara, slow start against Pepperdine, against Pacific, against USF. But in each of those cases, they've had much better second halves. They've been able to make those adjustments, and especially against both Pacific and Pepperdine, and also USF, we saw like Graham Ike just absolutely went off in those games in the second half. Just kind of talk about like what you're seeing from this squad, because they are starting off slow, but they are figuring it out later in the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. This has kind of been a trend for Gonzaga for a long time. Like I remember this a lot a decade or so ago when I was a student. They had a lot of slow starts and they figured it out in the second half. I think part of that is Mark Few making halftime adjustments. And I think another part of it is just that Gonzaga's kind of going to go in with their game plan. Teams are having to game plan against them. That has always been the case in the WCC. St. Mary's is one of the few teams that, you kind of have to have a more distinct plan against. So historically, Gonzaga goes in and does what they want to do, and the other team is doing something different to try to stop them. Pacific ran a zone, which they don't normally do. And we saw other teams trying different strategies against them. And are they going to double Graham? Are they going to not double Graham? And every team kind of does it a little differently. So I think Gonzaga has to be kind of reactive to whatever the opposing team decides to do. And sometimes it takes them a little longer. And I think with this particular iteration of the Zags, because they don't have a lot of familiarity playing with each other, they're a really new group, only 3 returners from last year, and they're kind of all playing different roles than they did last year. So I think it's just taken them a little longer to make those in-game adjustments. We are seeing them happen. And you mentioned Graham. I think he has 37 points in the last 2 second halves of basketball games. He's been an absolute beast when he gets into the second half. Would love to see that start a little earlier for him. Obviously, that would be something that would help Gonzaga fans, breathe a little better during the games. But certainly seeing what he's able to do in the second half of games has been a huge boost and is the reason that the Zags came out of last week unscathed.
And I mean, one of the other things that seems, at least like you look at the stat sheet, and it actually has been a little bit of a concern, has actually been the rebounding against some of the tougher rebounding teams. USF came in out rebounding Gonzaga. Santa Clara did the same thing against the better squads, some of the better squads in the WCC. It's how much of a concern is the rebounding been over the last couple of weeks, at least against these opponents that are in the conversation of actually being at the top of the league?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't have expected that to be an issue. And in fact, when I spoke with Coach Chris Gerlofson, the San Francisco head coach, the day before the game, and he talked specifically about rebounding. He said, Gonzaga's plus 10 on the boards. Like, this is a big area for us. And, for them, they have a 7-footer who comes off the bench, and you think he played a minute in that game, if not less. Like, he played the last 30 seconds of the first half. Mobo didn't have a particularly great game, and yet they still managed to out rebound Gonzaga, and Santa Clara, same thing. Now, Santa Clara is one of the tallest teams in the country per average height, so I'm not as surprised for them. But for Gonzaga, they recently made a starting lineup change and added Ben Gregg over Dusty Stromer. They're starting 3 big men who are 6'9" and taller, and yet they're struggling to get boards. I think it's a physicality thing in some ways. Guys are getting pushed around a little bit, which is not something we're used to with these Gonzaga teams. Certainly the guards are not particularly big, so occasionally we'll see the guards getting out rebounded, which isn't as surprising. But I think the rebounding is something that, on a list of concerns coming into this game against St. Mary's, and certainly next week against Kentucky, like, rebounding is a huge one. With if Gonzaga can't get offensive rebounds, if Gonzaga can't give St. Mary's second chance opportunities, like, that's going to be a huge problem for them. So it's definitely something I'm hoping the staff is poring over tape and figuring out what is going on here. Why are we getting out rebounded by teams that, frankly, we should be able to out rebound, and trying to address that issue.
And you mentioned one of the switches. Obviously, the recent switch has been Ben Gregg, and you and I talked a bit about it on last Thursday, about just like his insertion into that lineup and what difference it's made. Because like, he is that Energizer bunny that this team that they've needed. And the fact that he's been in the starting lineup clearly has made a difference for them. And you and I have also talked about this, that it has that 3 big lineup has actually worked a little bit more than I think we thought it would initially. But just kind of talking about what overall, it's it really just feels like this team has started to at least maybe find their roles a little bit more in the last few weeks, and part of that has been in line with Ben Gregg inserting into the lineup.
Yeah, I think a big part of Ben's move into the starting lineup was the benefit that it gave for Dusty Stromer. And Dusty had a really bad game against Pacific. So we're talking about him coming off of a rough stretch, and he's a freshman. And I think that we're going to see inconsistencies from him, just like we've seen inconsistencies from Braden Huff. Well, he'll have 1 game, 2 games, 3 games in a row, and you're like, wow, he looks fantastic. And I'm getting mailbag questions of is he going to break Drew Timmy's scoring record? And then he goes 3 games in a row with 6 total points. And you're like, oh, no, he's a freshman still, and he's still trying to find it. And Dusty, he's not being asked to do as much offensively. So for him, a good game might be 6 points, 4 boards, 2 steals, and a bad game might be 0 points, 3 boards. And you're like, well, it doesn't look that different, but it feels different. And you can tell on the floor. And I think for the Zags, having Dusty be in a role where he's not asked to do as much, where he is coming off the bench, which was his expectation all along when Steele Venters was added really early in the offseason. So there was always the plan that Dusty was going to come off the bench. I'm confident that had been what was communicated to him until Venters tears his ACL and they have to switch that lineup. And so I think putting Dusty in a role that he's perhaps more comfortable, there's less pressure on him, seems to have really worked. Meanwhile, Ben is a great floor spacer. He's more adept at playing on the perimeter offensively in ways that I think helps Gonzaga. He can also go down low and body people if he needs to. He's a really good rebounder defensively. He's not as good of a perimeter defender as Dusty, and that has hurt Gonzaga. But that's what Anton Watson's so great about, is you can move him around and you can say, okay, whoever the other team's best player is, whether they're a 2, a 3, a 4, or 5, we're going to throw Anton on him. And Watson guarded Mobo, and Mobo didn't do much in that game against San Francisco. And so I think being able to have Watson be that kind of jackknife defensively has allowed them to play Ben in this starting lineup and get more rebounds and have more energy, and also have a more prepared Dusty Stromer coming off the bench. So it's really been a win in a lot of ways, even coming off of a poor performance from Dusty last week. I think it's really helped this team in a lot of ways.
And going into this one, it really does feel like, you're going to need everybody to play well against St. Mary's to be able to beat this team. And I think the same goes for the other side. St. Mary's is going to have to play incredibly well to win in the Kennel, because it's just such a difficult place to win no matter how good you are. And just thinking about what Anton Watson is going to bring in this one. He's the guy who's been there the longest. He has seen multiple iterations of this St. Mary's team. It feels like he's going to have to be the one who gets them going early on, to set the tone to an extent, because he is the guy who has seen this team so often. He's had the ups, the downs with this squad against St. Mary's, knows the team. And again, this is a team that on the St. Mary's side is the same team as a year ago. You
Yep.
have some missing pieces, but he's seen them all already. So as has Nolan Hickman, but like just kind of, it feels like to me that this is a game where Anton Watson is going to have to set the tone early.
Yeah, I think he's the biggest X factor for this game. I think Graham Ike and Mitchell Saxon is gonna be a big battle down low, of course, but that may, neutralize Graham in ways that a lot of other teams in the WCC are unable to do. But if Mitchell's guarding Graham, then that may free up Watson a little bit. I'm guessing Jefferson will probably guard him. And Anton, we've seen in games where Graham has had good post players against him. Santa Clara has good posts. Anton Watson had 30 plus points. UCLA has good post players. Anton Watson had 35 points. Like, I think that is a recipe that Gonzaga has used when teams have been able to slow Graham down, when Graham gets in foul trouble, whatever it may be. Anton is, and a lot of times it's kind of just Gonzaga's offense breaks down and they can't, the outside shooting's not there, which I think that'll be a struggle against St. Mary's in their defense. If the outside shooting's not there and if Graham Ike is not there, Anton Watson's their offense. He was their offense against Santa Clara, against UCLA. There's been other games where he's just kind of taken over and they just give him the ball and let him go to work. And I think that we might see a fair amount of that. And I'm not sure how effective it'll be against St. Mary's. One-on-one ISO basketball doesn't always work, but I didn't think it'd be effective against UCLA, and he missed one shot. So he's capable of doing it. He's seen this team a lot. I think if I had to say which one player who needs to step up and have a career or at least a really, really good type of game for Gonzaga to win this game, it's Anton Watson. And frankly, it's not close. Like, other players will need to play well. Like you said, everybody will need to play well for Gonzaga to win this one, and vice versa. But it's going to come down, I think, a lot to Anton Watson, just based on personnel as well as his kind of experience and familiarity playing against this team.
Now, we talked about and kind of alluded to it. I was going to ask you, what does Gonzaga have to do to win? And so maybe it's more along the lines of, what sort of style is this game going to look like if Gonzaga is going to win this ball game? Because we know that both of these coaches are very capable of making you play to their pace. Mark Few is very good at forcing you to play more up tempo. Randy Ben is very good at making you slow down. Could Gonzaga potentially win a St. Mary's paced game, or is this a scenario where they're going to have to force the tempo and play a little bit faster to be able to pull it off?
Gonzaga's in an interesting spot this year because they're not playing as much of a tempo game as they have in the past. They don't have the personnel for it. Really, they don't have the depth for it, frankly. I mean, if Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman are going to play every minute of every game, which is more or less what has happened, getting into track meets is just not something that they're going to be able to do. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen against St. Mary's. That's more of a concern of, like, are they just going to get outran by Kentucky the week later? But for St. Mary's, I think this Gonzaga team may not try to super outrun them the way they have in the past. I do think they'll try to get out in transition at every opportunity that they can, but St. Mary's doesn't turn the ball over all that often, and Gonzaga is not going to try to get in transition on made baskets. So I think it won't be as much of a running game, and Gonzaga is also a better defensive team than they've been in a while, and that's not getting as much attention as I think it maybe could or should, just because most of the attention is on the fact that they haven't played all that well. They've lost more games than usual. They're not in the top 25, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a good defensive team. And so I think we're going to see a game that isn't as high scoring as Gonzaga's used to against St. Mary's, and a lower scoring, lower pace game might honestly favor the Gaels, but it might be a benefit to this iteration of Gonzaga, which is why I'm so fascinated by this game, because I do think that Gonzaga's half-court defense has improved enough to make life a little harder for St. Mary's. And the flip side, they're not going to be out and running. And I think the half-court offense, Gonzaga's half-court offense is the key to this game, because I think they'll play fine defensively, but St. Mary's is going to be great defensively, as they always are. And how Gonzaga responds to that, how they find ways to get points. Are they settling for threes because St. Mary's is going under on screens? Are they 2 of 20 like they were against Santa Clara? If so, there's no way they win. But what else can they do? Is it just Watson going crazy? Is Graham able to get Saxon in foul trouble? Like, there's a lot of different things that could happen that could really help Gonzaga in this game, but I think it's really going to boil down to their half-court offense, because I don't think we're going to see that tempo push that we've seen from them in the past.
Yeah, I'd agree. And again, you mentioned the defense held USF with only one field goal for a 12-minute stretch there in the second half of that game. Like, so that's something you do have to keep in mind. Like, that's a very efficient USF team, and they only had one field goal for the vast majority of the second half up in Spokane. So looking at this, I mean, the Zags have now won 5 straight against St. Mary's in the Kennel. Last loss was one of the Jock Landale teams back in 2018. So it has been a while since St. Mary's has actually been able to win up there. What does it look like, or who do you think is the one who goes off for St. Mary's if they are to pull off what I would still consider an upset in the Kennel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with Aiden Mahaney. I think it has to start there. Gonzaga's guards, I think Nolan Hickman will probably draw the assignment. He's typically been Gonzaga's guard who defends the opposing team's best guard. And Ryan Nemhard will probably get Marcelonis in that matchup. And it'll be really interesting to see how that works. Mahaney killed Gonzaga last year just by getting high pick and rolls, going to the basket, challenging Gonzaga's lack of rim protection. And that's still kind of an issue for the Zags. They're a better defensive team this year than they were last year in a lot of ways. And part of that is, Drew Timme wasn't a particularly good defensive player. Julian Strother wasn't a particularly good defensive player. And the players they've added in are better. But Graham Ike is not like a huge shot blocker. That's not his role. That's never been his role. So I don't think that if Mahaney can get to the rim, Gonzaga's posts are going to have to find ways to prevent him from scoring without fouling him. And that might be tough. And so if Mahaney can get to the rim, get to the free throw line, put Gonzaga's bigs in foul trouble, that puts so much pressure on Gonzaga. And some of the games that they've really struggled against Pacific, Watson picked up 2 fouls in the first 8 minutes or so. I think Graham Ike had 2 fouls in the first 5 minutes of that game. And if that becomes an issue for Gonzaga, they have front court depth. They have 4 bigs, but they start 3 of them, so they're kind of limited in how much they can do there. So I think it starts with Mahaney. I think it has to start with him just because of how talented he is and how well he's played as the season has flipped into conference play. This team's struggles early in the season were a huge part because of him, adjusting to being the man and having some struggles offensively. And so I think this team kind of lives and dies by him in a similar way to Gonzaga with Anton Watson. And so I think it starts with him. Certainly, Marcelonis, if he has early in the year, he had some horrifically bad shooting nights. If that were to show up, that could put more pressure on Mahaney, make things problematic for St. Mary's. So he's a big factor as well. But I think it starts with the point guard.
And for both of these teams, I don't want to overlook the fact that both of them do have one game before they see each other. Gonzaga does have LMU on Tuesday night, and then St. Mary's hosts Santa Clara on Wednesday. And I don't think either of those are going to be easy tests either.
No.
LMU has actually played St. Mary's really well the last 2 times. They won in the Kennel the last time they visited. So this is still a capable LMU team, and it's going to be the return of Dom Harris to the Kennel. Andy, it's like seeing him return, and with that team, just like some general thoughts of what you're expecting to see for Tuesday night.
Yeah, it's unfortunate the way that things went with Dom in Spokane. The injury, he missed an entire year. That obviously slowed his development and his ability to crack the rotation. In last year's team, I think the expectation was that he'd play more for them, but they didn't know that Rasir Bolton was going to come back when they got that commitment from Malachi Smith. Suddenly they have 2 veteran guards on this roster. They were kind of committed to Nolan Hickman. Once they realized he wasn't a great point guard, they were kind of trying to scramble to find somebody else to step into that role. And Hunter Salas was kind of playing out of position, and it didn't work for him. And Dom just never really kind of got that playing time. And it's great to see him thriving. He has done particularly well against not so great teams. If you look at his shooting splits against better teams, he struggles. And so that'll be an interesting element of, Gonzaga not only being a game that's kind of more emotionally driven for him and for the Zags and for the Kennel and everything. It's also a good defensive team. So I'm really curious how he's going to play, because LMU has been more dependent on him than I think they may have planned to be. He has, which shout out to him for putting himself in that position, but the rest of their guards haven't been as consistent. And so it'll be interesting. I think Dom's the big factor in that game, regardless of the outside factors, just in terms of if he shoots poorly, that LMU team tends to not do very well. So it should be a fun game, a highly emotional game, but one that Gonzaga absolutely cannot overlook when they're getting ready for St. Mary's.
Yeah, that LMU team, and they brought in so many guards in the off season. It was almost like, let's just get them all and see one of them has to stick, right? I think that was almost the strategy of they got a lot of good quality guys coming from largely mid-major programs, smaller programs that most of them unfortunately haven't hit, but yeah, Dom Harris has been one of the more consistent options that they've had.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into one of the things between St. Mary's and Gonzaga is there have been a number of villains throughout the years in this rivalry, and each of us have picked a starting lineup of villains from the other side. So I have 5 Zags. Andy has 5 Gaels. Of like who are the list of guys that just get under our skin every time we either hear their name or saw them on the court. And Andy, I'll start with you. We'll go back and forth, and we'll start at the guards and we'll work our way down to the center.
Okay. Start with the guards then, because I was going to start with the center, as you can probably imagine.
Or actually, you know what? Whichever way you want to start, like we'll just go back.
Well, I mean, I was going to start with the true villain, Omar, Samhan. He was the ultimate first villain that I can recall. I mean, for me personally, as a freshman in his, I think, sophomore year or junior year, maybe, and just getting taught from the other Kennel Club board members, like, hey, we don't like this guy. He didn't like us. We don't like him. Like that's what this is like. And I don't know how many games I'd been to before my first St. Mary's game, but that was when you kind of really got it. Like that was my first real like college basketball experience of like, hey, this isn't just Gonzaga going and beating some other team by 15 points and we're just happy they won. Like there's like some emotion here, and Omar really hammed it up as he always has. Shout out to him for kind of still getting booed at the Spokane airport like a few years ago. Like that, I love that story. He's a very, very good basketball player, was very, very villainous, and I think is a huge cog in this rivalry.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Omar, just the cachet that he carried, just like he had the character to go along with his play on the court. Like that's what usually makes this. And I'm going to go with one, not quite the level of the character, but just like also the play, the look. My generation, I have to go with Adam Morrison as being that chief villain. On the Gonzaga broadcast now, and every time I see him on camera, I still like cringe a little bit seeing him there because he was just so good. We know like the player of the year, he was top 3 pick of the NBA draft, but he came to play and he was ready to go in Moraga every single time. And he seemed to just like thrive off of that energy from the crowd. Like he was one of the better college basketball players of his generation. And Adam Morrison is one. It's hard to just kind of quantify, especially in that era of St. Mary's where we were still trying to get off the ground. And he was the guy in the midst of that Gonzaga run. I will admit, like when Gonzaga lost to UCLA in that comeback and Morrison hits the floor crying, like I definitely did enjoy that moment, but a lot of people enjoyed that moment. I was with my suite mates. I remember exactly where I was watching that game. But yeah, Adam Morrison is probably number 1 for me.
Yeah, he's on a lot of teams' lists, I think, for his style and ability to beat you and look the way he did. I totally get that one. I'm going to go down to the point guard position. Guy who played with Samhan at least for 1 year, Matthew Dellavedova, the mouth guard. The Kennel, we had a game, I think his senior year, where every single person in the student section got a mouth guard and was wearing them in honor of him, I guess. Kind of I would take that as a sign of respect, I guess. Very talented player, was willing to kind of, clap back at the Kennel a little bit, always hit big shots. Obviously, long, lengthy NBA career for him, one of the most talented players in that program. And he let the Kennel know about it a lot.
Yeah. All right. Next one I'm going to, and Delhi is one of the great ones. Like I also just, when I think of him, I think of what he did at BYU and the Dell of a Dagger. That's the, it's the BYU moment I remember him most for now. Jeremy Pargo is one that I would pull. It was more along the lines of he was just so good. He was so physical. And because he was one of the guards for Gonzaga that was able to play above the rim, the way he attacked the basket, the way he was able to really take over games late many times, just drove me nuts. And he obviously has had a pretty long professional career still. I think he's still playing right now. And yeah, he was just one of those guys that that I dreaded seeing come into the building.
Mm-hmm.
And because it seemed like when he saw us, he played better.
Yeah.
And that's usually the one that makes it that much more, the dread just sets in that much more, knowing that they play better against you.
Yeah.
So Jeremy Pargo would be one of the guards I'm going with.
I'm looking for my other guard. There's so many options. I mean, Mahaney's already put himself in that conversation. There's guys like Nar and Rayhan and Jordan Ford, but I'm going back to that same era again. Mickey McConnell is the pick here. Game-winning 3 against Gonzaga in the Kennel that took the absolute life out of that building in a way that I'll never forget. Incredibly talented player for that program for many years. I think that a guard, like if you're thinking about St. Mary's guards who've harassed Gonzaga, I think that duo right there of Deli and McConnell is a pretty devastating one. And I again, in a long list of fantastic guards for St. Mary's and guards who have given Gonzaga fits, those two stand out to me.
I was going back and forth on this one, and you know what? I think I am going to switch mine because I got some feedback on Twitter about this one.
Mm-hmm.
And I initially had Matt Bolden as one of my other guards,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to switch it. And I have to say Josh Perkins.
Okay.
Josh Perkins, I think it was along the lines of, because of that era of Gonzaga basketball,
Mm-hmm.
he was kind of the fifth guy in that starting lineup. Like he had incredible talent around him on those teams. And it seemed like that he was the one that always seemed to seemed to catch us at the wrong time on this, if you're looking at it from a St. Mary's lens. Josh Perkins, for everything that I know St. Mary's fans will try to say he didn't do, he was one of the more successful and winningest players Gonzaga's ever had. He was a starter for what I think was 3 of the 4 years. So you can't take away just like the impact and what Josh Perkins meant and the role he was able to play on those teams. And he was just a thorn in the side of a lot of St. Mary's fans over the years.
Yeah. I'm going with, for my small forward position here, I'm going to go with Calvin Hermanson. And I may have a tiny bit of bias that he also went to my rival high school, so he just really didn't want to be friends with me, clearly. But really talented scorer. I just remember his ability to get those corner threes off, and it felt like he shot something like 80% in that spot, was a really gifted shooter. He had that kind of look in a similar way to Morrison of just like, doesn't look like a guy who should be killing you on the basketball court, and yet he did day in, day out. And I just remember he was a part of some of those St. Mary's teams that took Gonzaga down, that played. That was a really competitive period of time between these two teams, and he was a part of a lot of Gonzaga losses against the Gaels, and so he stands out to me. I almost went with Steve Holt, but I honestly just loved Stephen Holt. Like, he was a fantastic, fun guy, and he was. I already went with players from that era of St. Mary's basketball, so I thought Hermanson kind of fit well here.
So next one I'm going to go, and all right, I'm switching this one too. Initially because I had Drew Timme, but I'm like, Drew Timme didn't feel like a full villain to me. Like, he was just amazing. You had respect for how good he was.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch it. I'm going with Elias Harris.
I thought Elias might be on there.
I'm going with Elias Harris because there was so often that he came in and just hit the dagger shot that set the game in motion. The one I remember very clearly, I think it was the 2012 WCC championship game, and St. Mary's, I think, had a 3-point lead with less than 10 seconds to go. Elias Harris hits a 3 from the top of the key to send it to overtime. And that was one of the better Gonzaga St. Mary's games I think we've ever seen for that title. And that was a bragging rights title. There was, like, both teams were going to be in the tournament, so that was just a fun one to watch. But even when he first arrived, he was just so good.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, man, Gonzaga has another one of these guys. And Elias Harris had a little, like, that energy, that toughness that you didn't want to see again. So Elias Harris.
Yeah, that's a great pick. That's a great pick. For my final one, I was looking at a couple of bigs to kind of go alongside Sam Hand. Like, I thought about Malik Fitz, but he never really played that well against Gonzaga. I thought about Landale, but that era, he wasn't really the villain. I didn't feel in the same way. So I'm going to go somewhat obscure, and I'm going to go with Bo Levesque. who had some really good games against Gonzaga, and he's kind of back in that same era we were talking about before. I know he had some shouting matches with the Kennel. He had some altercations where he was a very emotional guy, and you could see it that it felt like the Kennel was getting to him and he was getting back to them. And I just remember him more viscerally than I remember a lot of other players. And so and he was obviously a talented guy as well. Had a couple really good seasons for the Gaels. So he would be my 4 in this starting lineup against the Zags.
All right. So that's a good one. I love Bo Levesque. It's just the energy he brings really everywhere.
Yeah.
Last pick, I'm going with who's probably he's probably the Omar Light of this rivalry, and it's Robert Sacre.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't make a list of Gonzaga villains without saying his name. It was kind of very similar way in the sort of energy that he brought, that Omar brought. At least like I felt like that on our end, because he would be talking to the students, like he would have that energy. Not quite the level of player that Omar was at the end of his career, but just he was so good, so consistent over the course of his Gonzaga career. Obviously ended up playing in the league as well for a while. Robert Sacre just got under my skin like no other, and maybe even more than some of the others on this list. But Robert Sacre would rounds out my 5.
Love it. Great pick.
All right. So those who are listening, go ahead and actually let us know who are your villains. I think it'd be great to kind of see what other names pop up. I mean, I had a few others that were on my list that not quite that level, but it's great to see them. Great to remember these names and remember just like how the part they played in this rivalry. Andy, thanks a lot for hopping on. It's great always chatting with you. Gonzaga and St. Mary's this Saturday, and then for obviously all Zag coverage, go to find Andy on the Locked On Zags podcast. You can find him there as well.
Thanks, Zach. Always fun to chat, and looking forward to chatting again later this week.
Yep. All right, Zags and Gaels. It is happening this weekend. This is obviously the premier WCC matchup that we're always all looking forward to, or at least on the Gonzaga and St. Mary's side. Everyone else would like to see both teams burn, but this is the marquee WCC game. This is the one that is circled every year by ESPN. This is the one that's circled by many college basketball fans. And I think we're going to see a very different type of game than we're used to seeing from both of these squads. At least the matchups, like it really always does feel that either one or the other team really takes command of the tempo, and that's how this game is. That's usually the end result of the game. But Andy makes a good point about the difference in the Gonzaga team that we're seeing right now and the style of play in which they actually might be better suited. And they might be better playing it a little slower, being a little bit more deliberate in that half-court offense. And yes, the St. Mary's defense is really, really good. They're top 10 adjusted defense on KenPom. They're going to be that's going to be a tough group to crack. This is not a team. This is a team that plays connectively well, even though they may not have great, outstanding individual defenders. They are collectively just so difficult to match up against, and they are so interchangeable on that defensive end. Augustus Marciulionis, I think, is an underrated defender. I think I have focused so much on what he's been able to do offensively that you kind of forget that he's been a good defensive player so far this year. Alex Dukas is one of those defenders. Luke Barrett off the bench has been great. Mitchell Saxon. So you looking up and down this roster, there are a lot of really good defenders, and collectively they are even that much better. So, yeah, Andy pointed out Aiden Mahaney as being a key for St. Mary's. For me, it's Joshua Jefferson. I think he's more the key to me because of who his assignment is likely to be, and that's Anton Watson. Anton Watson, we know, is one of the best defenders in the country. He is incredibly good playing inside, outside, being able to really kind of take one person away. And it's critical for St. Mary's' success that Joshua Jefferson play well. At least I think it is against this team in that location. So He's the one I'm going to circle for St. Mary's. On the Gonzaga side, I think, and I mentioned, I think this is an Anton Watson game. Like, he has to play well because he is the one who has the deep connections, the deep knowledge of this rivalry, that he's the one who has to set the tone early, because unlike these other games, I do not think that Gonzaga can play poorly in the first half and get a win out of this game, because St. Mary's is too good once they get a lead that they will just clamp down on you even harder. And that's the challenge against this team. It's you better jump out early and keep the pressure on St. Mary's, because if they get a lead, we see how well they can just absolutely suffocate teams. Saw just a couple weeks ago, they only allowed Pacific to score 28. And I know it's Pacific, that doesn't really move the needle all that much, but this St. Mary's squad is just as good defensively as it was a year ago. Maybe not with the elite defender that Logan Johnson was, but they're still getting the job done in a very efficient way. But before that game happens, LMU Gonzaga is happening on Tuesday night. And for me, this game is going to be it feels like it's going to be a really tough fight for Gonzaga in this one, and for LMU. LMU is yet to get any one of these quality wins or quality opportunities that they've had. They've gotten close a few times. They gave Colorado State a really good run. They've nearly beaten St. Mary's twice. They look like they could have gotten a win against Oakland. They let one slip away against Stephen F. Austin. There are so many opportunities that they have had that they have not been able to cash in on. And they showed that maybe they are putting together at least the game plan. The right game plan is happening. They out-rebounded St. Mary's. That's critical. They made sure that they relatively took care of the basketball. I think they ended up with like about 12 turnovers, which is about where you expect them to be. So nothing outlandish or anything like that. But it's also being able to shoot well against those defenses. Again, they shot 51% against St. Mary's. If they can do that against that team, you'd think that they actually are going to have a pretty good shot against Gonzaga, even though Gonzaga has also been a much improved defensive team this year. Also, it's the return of Dom Harris to Spokane, a year removed from transferring from Gonzaga to LMU. And he really didn't get much of an opportunity to showcase what he could do up there. But as we have seen to this point, he's been a really good player for LMU. I think he's still their leading scorer at this point. And his contribution, I think, is critical to whether or not LMU can pull out a win or not. And keep in mind that LMU won in that building just a year ago. And I'm sure enough of the Gonzaga fans and faithful remember that Cam Shelton walked into that building and absolutely took over, and they were able to steal a win in the Kennel. But this is a different Gonzaga team. This is a largely different LMU team. You do still have Kelly Laupepe. You still have Alex Merkviladze. So there are still some pieces there that remember what it was like to get that win in the Kennel. But for many, it's going to be a different vibe. It's going to be a different energy. And this is not going to be a game I feel that Gonzaga is going to be able to run away from. I think LMU is going to stay relatively close to them, and Gonzaga might pull away late. But this does feel like one that's going to be, they're going to get 30, 32, 34 minutes into this one, and it's still going to be pretty close. I think LMU's going to hang around in this one for a long time. Unfortunately for them, this still feels like a Zag win. Up in Spokane before they host St. Mary's. All right, switching over to Santa Clara and St. Mary's. This is a dangerous game, I think, for St. Mary's, because metrically this looks a lot like Weber State. And this is a Santa Clara team that we know is capable of beating anybody. They've already beaten Gonzaga. They've already beaten Oregon. They've already beaten Washington State. They are capable of beating almost anyone. Like, they have the talent. It's a matter of whether they put it all together. And since that loss to St. Mary's, they've quietly gone about their business. They've won 3 in a row. So they are sitting there at 6-1 and doing what they're supposed to do against Pacific, Portland, Pepperdine. And I don't think that what we saw against when Santa Clara played St. Mary's a couple weeks ago was a good representation of Santa Clara. That was about as bad as I've seen them play all year, and I've seen most of their games to this point. They were coming off the Gonzaga win. They had to play St. Mary's 2 days later, which for any team having to see Gonzaga St. Mary's back to back is a rough go. USF had to do that. San Diego had to do that. Pacific had to do that. I don't know how so many of these teams had to end up playing Gonzaga St. Mary's back to back, but there's been quite a few teams who have had to do that 1-2. And I don't expect Adama Ball to be held to 4 points again. I don't expect Carlos Marshall to only score 1 point again. I expect this to be a vastly different game than the first one we saw. I expect Santa Clara to be in this game from the get-go. I expect them to be able to rebound better than they did a couple weeks ago. The Santa Clara team is better than what we saw, and I don't think for the St. Mary's fans who saw that game, watched that game, and were very happy to see the old-time rival Santa Clara go down in flames, I would not expect that to be the blueprint on how you're going to have to beat this team on Wednesday, because they're going to come out hungrier, they're going to come out more focused, and they've also had a full week to prepare for St. Mary's. They have not played since last Thursday. They were off on Saturday. This gives them so much more time to rest up, prep, and get ready for a team that embarrassed them just a couple weeks ago. And this team is good enough, talented enough to get the job done. And I think the rebounding is the key in this one. St. Mary's is one of the best rebounding teams in the country, one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country, and second chance points is a critical component to their success. If St. Mary's can continue to do that and dominate on the boards, do their part with second chance points, they probably pull this one out. I think you also need to obviously have solid performances from either Augustus Marshallonis or Aiden Mahaney. I think Luke Barrett will play a little bit more of a factor in this one. And for Santa Clara, you need a big game from Adama Ball. I feel like that's a given. You need a big game from him. You need Johnny O'Neal to also be big and hitting some clutch shots. Carlos Marshall Jr. needs to get off to a good start in this game. I think you're going to need Brenton Napper to also play a big factor in this one. Napper was an enormous component in the win over Gonzaga, and he like most of the rest of the roster, was a non-factor against St. Mary's. So I think it's critical that a lot of their role players play well. That doesn't mean that they have to score 15 points, but they need to contribute, take care of the basketball, and do all the little things well. Because St. Mary's does all the little things well. They rebound, they take care of the basketball, they share it, they are going to attack the basket. We know they're not the greatest of shooting teams, so that is an area you need to take advantage of, and if you can keep them off the glass, that gives you a shot to beat St. Mary's on Wednesday. All right, and then just take a quick look at the rest of the WCC slate. It is a little bit lighter on that front. It's also the first disjointed week, so we have a game on Tuesday, game on Wednesday, 2 on Thursday, Portland Pacific, and then San Diego USF. And then the weekend, San Diego at Santa Clara, Pepperdine Portland, St. Mary's and Gonzaga, and then Pacific and San Francisco. All right. I will not be hosting a live this week because of the schedule a little bit disjointed. We'll skip a week and we'll try again the following week. All right, and that'll do it. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite streaming service. Follow along on social media at Post by Zach. That'll do it. Have a great week, everybody, and I will catch you next time.